So One Nation, I've always been drawn to them. I see them as the party of common sense. I see them as the party for workers. They're willing to stand up for people.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Ray. Welcome to another episode of the New South Wales One Nation TV. Today I am joined with Mark Watson. He is the candidate for the Newcastle electorate. Really excited to have you here today to hear about your thoughts and what got you into politics. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. So what got me into politics was I started to see the decline in the quality of government and how they're treating the average voter there. So I kind of wanted to get in there, make a difference, stand up for the average Aussie, for the hard workers of this country, and do the right by them. I think every Australian deserves a fair go, and that's something to stand up and fight for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing that this isn't something you've always done. You're not a career politician. You're an everyday Australian like myself. And I'd love to hear a bit about your background prior to obviously you running in this particular election. But yeah, what made you Mark and your journey up until now?
Yeah, no worries. So I've been a chef since the age of 16. Did my apprenticeship, and I've really only had two jobs in my life. I'm kind of a loyal worker, hard worker, I would say I am. And I just see what goes on in politics and all the empty promises and all the lies. And I see how we're not benefiting. The cost of living is getting harder and harder. Running businesses is getting harder. Finding workers is getting harder. Getting people into the workforce is even getting harder. So there's a lot of things there that need to be addressed, and that's something that got me into it, wanting to make a change, wanting to make a difference.
I feel like being a chef would be incredibly difficult work. A lot of people wouldn't realize, but I'm guessing there's a lot of late nights, a lot of weekend works when people are sort of winding down. You're out there working hard. So I don't doubt you're a hard worker. I think chefs are very hard workers. But what sort of led you to One Nation? There are a lot of political parties out there, major parties, and there's also like a real emergence of independent sort of political parties. But what was it that was attractive about One Nation to you?
So One Nation, I've always been drawn to them. I see them as the party of common sense. I see them as the party for workers. They're willing to stand up for people. Probably, I've always followed Pauline. Really appreciated what she's done for her communities. But Mark Latham is another figure there that's drawn me into it in the last few years. He speaks the true word of common sense. And I think that rings true with a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate Mark, especially I've said this before, Mark 2.0. He had a go before in politics, left, and he's come back and he's on fire. As you said, common sense, speaks for everyday Australians. And yeah, I think it's great that One Nation are a political party that have been around for a really long time as well, which I'm guessing is something that you appreciated. But your particular electorate, which is the Newcastle area, are you able to sort of explain to the listeners the size of area that particular electorate is? And maybe if you could give sort of borders, like suburbs and things, so we can gauge an idea of the size?
Yeah, no worries. We stretch along with the borders of the Hunter down to Shortland and around to Patterson, which is Port Stephens. So it's a fairly large, dense area, a lot of development going on there. We've got the Port of Newcastle. We export majority of the world's coal. So it's a decent sized area with a lot of people in there. It's been a Labor stronghold since day go. And I think it's time for change.
And your particular electorate itself, have you identified some areas just specifically for your electorate that you think, I guess, require amending or fixing, or you don't think it's been handled necessarily well prior to this, and things that you specifically want to do for your area alone if you were elected into position?
So one of the major things, which is probably on the main ticket for a lot of people, is the cost of living and housing affordability. So we need to really work on getting the cost of living down, and we need to find solutions for housing affordability. So a lot of people have been pushed out of the cities, or it's becoming too expensive for them to live. Homeless rates in Newcastle have gone up in the last 2 years, part of parcel with COVID. But that's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and we need to work on that, just having a better quality of life, not only for Newcastle people, but all Australians.
Mm. And are these sort of policies that you would be promoting? Is this like what would you like to do specifically to sort of make the cost of living better for people in Newcastle?
So first thing is we've got to look at fuel. That's a major issue. So in regards to fuel, that puts your farming costs up. That increases your transport, your freight to your sale yards, down to your markets, to your wholesalers, and down to your small business, which increases costs for everything. So being in hospitality, the first thing that people are going to cut is going out. They're not going to go out for their breakfast or for their lunch or dinner, and that's going to hit a lot of businesses within Newcastle because we're so rich with the hospitality industry. So fuel is probably one thing that we can look at, making sure there's no increase to the GST, and then look at tax reform. So look at ways to bring down the taxes that we pay. Everyone should have to pay their fair share of tax. One of the key policies there through One Nation is making sure that multinational businesses pay their fair share of tax while operating within Australia.
Mm. Yeah, and you said that Newcastle is an area that has a lot of catering and a lot of small businesses and things like that. I know small business is something that you're quite passionate about as well. Can you sort of share a little bit about how you feel with small businesses and possibly like the red tape and things like that they have to go through?
Yeah, so one thing I've seen in small business lately is the massive increase in prices. So we rely a lot on imported products, and small businesses right through from, say, your cafes, your restaurants, everything's going up in price and it's not coming back down. Mechanics are struggling to get parts that they have to ship from different parts of the country, from overseas. Which comes down to manufacturing. So we should be making a lot of these parts here. So it kind of affects everything. And one of the trends that we see is everything goes up, but it never comes back down.
Mm. That's true. There is a tendency for things to really increase, but then never settle again. And then you kind of just have to get desensitized to the idea that that's the new normal, that's the new normal way of life. And yeah, unfortunately, businesses and families and things like that usually get hit the hardest with those particular things. Now, another thing that you've mentioned, and you mentioned a little bit before, was about jobs and manufacturing. You mentioned as well that Newcastle had like one of the biggest coal exports of the country. I didn't even know that. That's how blind I am to it. But what's the job situation and the manufacturing sort of situation like in Newcastle electorate?
So if we look at the coal export, there's been discussions there, I believe through Labor and even the Greens there, they want to reduce the coal that we're exporting to the world. That can have huge flow-on effects. A lot of these companies put a lot of money into the communities and invest back. And it's within the whole region there as well, throughout the Hunter, through Shortland. We're closing down coal-fired power stations. They want to shut down mines. It's going to have a massive flow-on effect.
And how do you feel about coal? It's a bit of a dirty word for a lot of politicians these days, but what's your stance on that sort of energy source and fossil fuels?
Look, I'm with Dale McNamara and the Hunter there, make coal great again. It doesn't have to be a dirty word. We can have high efficiency, low emission power stations that power the grid. Coal's probably always going to be with us. And that's the integral part of building this nation.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts? I've spoken to a few other One Nation candidates as well as yourself who've sort of mentioned the word nuclear sort of power. Is that something you'd be open to, something you'd be willing to explore, or at least have the conversation about?
Yeah, 100%. So, the discussion should be on the table for nuclear power. So, if we look overseas, they've actually started using nuclear power as a green energy source, as they call it. So, it's next to no emissions. Yes, I understand people bring up the argument that there are risks involved, but with how technology's developed, there are safe ways to do it. And we've got a big enough uh, country to be able to develop this and power our people at a lower cost, and that in turn will help our businesses and our manufacturing sector.
Absolutely. And I think I like how you said bring power to the people. And so often, a lot of the strategies that are used, a lot of policies, they don't really seem to benefit the majority of Australians. And it seems to only kind of line the pockets of people, not everyday Australians like you and I. How do you feel about foreign ownership and things like that? Because One Nation's pretty good at putting Australia first and foremost. Is that something that you would have a similar mentality about?
100%. So I believe that Australians should be put first. We should be developing this country. Our resources that we dig up, we should have them here. We should be refining our own fuels, making our own steel, creating jobs in Australia for Australians.
Mm. You've mentioned as well about a 90-day fuel reserve. I'm not really overly familiar with that concept or idea, but I'd love to sort of hear how you feel about that and what it is you think that would achieve for Australia if we were to do that.
Yeah, no worries. So going back about 20 years ago, Australia used to have 8 refineries, and now we're down to 2 with limited capacity. Uh, and we used to have a 90-day reserve fuel policy, which means that if fuel stopped coming into the country, there'd be 90 days worth of fuel there to survive. Right now, we're lucky to have 30 days. So
Mm.
that's probably one of the reasons why fuel fluctuates quite a lot. There's not a huge reserve there.
Hmm. We're really suffering at the moment. I'm not sure about what the fuel is like in your particular area, but I'm paying $2.20, something ridiculous for my diesel, just to power my car at the moment. And yeah, I guess that 90-day fuel thing would be super helpful in preventing the constant up and down of the fuel market. Obviously, within reason, it's going to change, but at such drastic and expensive measures, it gets pretty hard to sort of manage with those things. But I also wanted to sort of talk to you about the last couple of years. The big question that's on a lot of people's minds, especially as they go into the voting booth, is what candidates have felt the last 2 years has been like. Whether, I guess, putting a vote for you would mean we're likely to go back into lockdown or we're likely to have mandates again. A lot of people want to know whether you're happy with the handling of the last 2 years or you think that it should have been handled differently.
Yeah, so I think the handling definitely could have been done better. So one of the policies that One Nation want to introduce is we want to have a royal commission into the handling of COVID-19. Not so much to find a scapegoat or pass the buck of blame. Ultimately, the blame falls back with Scott Morrison. But we want to look at how we can do things better. I'm pretty sure everyone can agree that there were things that we could do better. One of the big things that I will be pushing is to end the vaccine mandates. So I've spoken to a large number of people in my electorate that have been affected by these mandates. And the reason that they're in place is pretty much obsolete at the moment. So you've got perfectly good people out of work, struggling to find work to survive over mandates. At the end of the day, it shouldn't be mandated. Everyone should have a fair go. We haven't done this for anything else, and we're almost creating a two-tier society.
Yeah, absolutely. There is most certainly a two-tiered society, and unfortunately, it's the division has been quite disheartening. You mentioned that you spoke to a lot of people in your electorate who have lost their jobs. Like, I'm not sure if you know the exact figure, but is there quite a large number of people in your particular area who were affected by those mandates?
I would personally know of a couple hundred that I've spoken to. There could be even more.
Mm.
Um, I've heard stories where during the height of the pandemic, one lady had a child that had to have speech therapy, and she couldn't even enter into the room
Mm.
for the therapy, and the child had to do speech therapy with a mask on. And we discussed common sense before, and it's like common sense just went right out the window, and there were so
Mm.
many of these they implemented that contradict each other. So you
Mm.
just look at Dominic Perrottet the other day. He comes out and admitted that the QR codes for the last year and a half were not necessary. They weren't doing anything. They were just there for
Mm.
no sign.
Yeah, that press conference was quite telling, quite revealing. And yeah, as you said, Dom Perrottet admitted that it had no like scientific or medical purpose for it. It was to, for other reasons, which was, and it would be hard, I imagine, for people in the position who have lost their jobs and who are kind of, like at the brink of losing their family homes and, like stressing about how they're going to feed their kids. And then to hear things like this, you've got to ask the question, like, how else has it been mishandled and how could have it been handled better? Is there anything else in your particular area that you've been approached with by locals, by people you've spoken to in the community who have sort of expressed concerns for your area in particular, and I guess what they feel like the current government aren't really doing and what they'd like you to do for them?
Yeah, so I've had some people contact us about family law and child support, which is another one of One Nation's policies.
Mm.
So we need to have a fair and balanced court system that represents parents equally. Um, Without getting into too much detail, I've been approached by a few people that have had bad experiences and think that it could have been handled better.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people that I've interviewed for One Nation, different candidates, have said something similar, that a lot of people, because of the line that Pauline Hanson has taken with all of the family court stuff, that they're really interested to see what One Nation candidates can do for them. It seems like it's a bigger issue than is given enough airtime for. And I think people sort of would love to sort of have your support with that. You mentioned to me earlier as well that apprenticeships is something that you feel quite passionate about. It's an area that you feel strongly in, and I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on what that particular issue with apprenticeships is and what you think needs to be done.
Yeah, so One Nation is putting forward a apprenticeship scheme where first year apprentices are subsidised with their wage by 75%, 50% for the second, and 25% for the third. Now, as a small business, that's fantastic because you're more inclined to take on apprentices. That said, though, from chatting to a few people involved within TAFEs within my electorate, we need to ensure that their education is correct as well. So one thing I've heard back from the TAFEs, or a couple of people who have worked in TAFEs, is that often these programs aren't sufficient enough for training them. The equipment that they have in the TAFEs are normally obsolete by the time they get to the workforce. Some businesses I was talking to said that they've had apprentices that were signed off by the TAFEs after 2 years or 3 years, but in the workplace, as an employer, they weren't happy to sign them off as an apprentice because they simply just did not know enough.
Mm. Yeah, there seems to be missing a big portion of what is required. You yourself, I think, mentioned that you went through TAFE and had an apprenticeship and things like that. Did you find similar things like that when you were doing it yourself?
Yeah, so when I did my apprenticeship, would have been well over 12 years ago. that was when they cut it down from 4 years down to 3 years. And I remember my head chef at the time there, Rob, telling me that even once you've done your 3 years, you're still going to be considered learning for your fourth. And now with commercial cookery, they've cut that course down to only 2 years. So they're turning out chefs in 2 years that they're probably not up to scratch. So if you apply that to a more technical job, that could be, prove a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's interesting. I served in the police for 12 years and I had less training than you, Mark. I had 10 months in Goulburn and then, like less than a year. So it is interesting that you mentioned that. I've said that, our education and training and things across the board with a lot of government institutions, TAFE included, should probably improve. And I think a lot of Aussies would like to see that happen. Now, you've also mentioned that you're really passionate about families. You're a family man yourself, and you obviously know and live in communities with lots of other families. What are some things that you've noticed when it comes to families that you think should be made easier, that the politicians should obviously be speaking for them, but what is it specifically with families that you feel pretty passionate about?
Yeah, so we've covered a few of the topics already, but the main one, cost of living there, cost of energy. We just need to bring down the costs that the families have to outlay to survive. It's becoming even harder. If you go down the grocery store right now and spend $100, you're lucky to fill a bag or two. As fill a trolley 20 years ago. So we need to make it easier for our families. We need to make it easier for them to get into their first homes. We need to make it easier for them to put a roof over their head, and we need to give them a fair go.
Yeah, I think an average grocery shop for just, your nuclear family, is around sitting close to $400 for like a proper, like just a weekly shop, which is, it's hard to fathom that that's reality because of the cost that is exactly. And then I'm not sure if it's the same with you, but you always forget something with that weekly shop and you've got to go back and it ends up costing $80, $100. And you're like, I don't know how I keep spending this much money at the grocery store. Now, Newcastle is a really big sort of diverse area, as you mentioned. I'm sure you're going to have your hands full, but leading into the election, is there events that you're going to be going to, places where people might be able to meet you, and any places where they can maybe ask you some specific questions about specific policies if they have any thoughts, or if they can approach you about things that they're concerned about?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we had a successful event a couple of weeks ago there at the Newcastle show. That was great. We got to meet lots of people. We're looking around for different events and shows to go to. We will be approaching a few markets in the coming weeks. On our Facebook page, or on my Facebook page there, we put up what we're doing. I'm organising a meet and greet barbecue on the 2nd of April there. And that's with Quentin King from Shortland, which the border kind of runs through Newcastle. So yeah, definitely if people want to get involved, want to come meet me, come talk to me, then contact me through Facebook. They can contact me through email. I'm more than happy to have a chat, and I'll put any events that we're doing up there.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I hope people do reach out to you if they have any more questions. I hope that the next election goes really well. And if there's anything you wanted to sort of say before we wrap it up, please take it away.
Let's just hope we have a good election and a fair election. And One Nation really wants to stand up for the people of Australia, and hopefully they recognise that and they get behind us and support us. Thanks for having us, Evelyn.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Mark.